Week 11 of A Year of Cinema is After Hours, the 1985 nightmare comedy by Martin Scorsese. As the film begins, the soundtrack is a juvenile symphony by Mozart, establishing us in the world of classical order. Our hero, Paul Hackett, Griffin Dunne, is part of this world. He works in the Italian Renaissance revival splendor of the Metropolitan Life Tower, instructing others in the mysteries of word processing. His pupil, Bronson Pinchot, assures him that this boring job, this boring world, Paul's world, is not for him. Not for long, anyway. He intends to start a magazine for writers that can't get published elsewhere. He is the first of many soi-disant artists we will meet. Paul has heard it all before. He knows about Edvard Munch, and he has a David Hockney print on his living room wall. As Pinchot natters on in his youthful arrogance, the soundtrack switches to the poignant air from Bach's Orchestral Suite No. 3. Paul drifts away and Pinchot stops short in embarrassment. In the city, New York City in this case, people don't listen to each other, sometimes because they are bored or distracted, other times because they're asleep or dead. Paul can hardly bear his empty apartment, so he goes alone to a coffee shop to read Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. A delicious young woman, Marcy, Rosanna Arquette, commends him on his taste. She knows the book and knows about art as well. She quotes the author, who declared that this novel was in fact a gob of spit in the face of art. Paul is impressed. She is transfixed by the cashier, who performs ballet movements to an invisible audience. She is staying in Soho with a local artist, Kiki Bridges, who makes plaster of Paris bagel and cream cheese paperweights. She gives him her phone number, which he almost forgets because his pen has run out of ink. The sexual double entendre is no coincidence. It would have been better if Paul had forgotten the number. Sometime later, a despairing and hysterical Paul laments to the heavens, "I just wanted to leave my apartment, maybe meet a nice girl, and now I have to die for it?" Scorsese is coy about this in his commentary, but it is obvious that he still bears the imprint of a Catholic education. Paul's intentions regarding Marcy are not honorable. He is keen to violate the sixth commandment, and so he must be punished. Paul calls Marcy, and she invites him to Soho. It is quite late when he calls, and Marcy's eagerness to see him right away means but one thing to him. He can hardly believe his luck. Paul's luck changes as soon as he leaves home for the 5-mile journey south. His cabbie is deranged, and his lunatic driving causes Paul's money, a $20 bill, to fly out the window. Paul, therefore, doesn't have the money to pay the cabbie, but he will have his revenge later. Pretty much everybody gets revenge on Paul, even though he's guilty of nothing more than committing adultery in his heart. It is, after all, after hours, and different rules apply. When he reaches Kiki's loft, he stands awaiting entrance, and Kiki throws the keys to him from an upper floor. These are the keys to the underworld, as Scorsese notes, just as his lost 20 was the token he needed to pay Charon the boatman. Marcy isn't there, so Paul passes the time with Kiki, who is crazy sexy and barely dressed. Kiki puts Paul to work just like a real Soho artist on her sculpture, a papier-mâché version of Munch's The Scream. Paul, of course, becomes the art on which he labors, first figuratively and then literally. Marcy returns from the all-night drugstore. There is something wrong with her, both physically and mentally. She disappears again, whispers with Kiki, then reappears, always desirable but always unavailable. A fed-up Paul accepts the marijuana he had refused earlier. Instead of relaxing him, however, the drug precipitates a hilarious paranoid freakout. He demands that Marcy cough up one of Kiki's plaster of Paris bagel and cream cheese paperweights. Even as we sit chatting, he rages, there are important papers flying rampant around my apartment because I don't have anything to hold them down with. Ah, the wounded amour propre of the sexually frustrated. Marcy runs sobbing to Kiki as Paul storms out. The skies have opened and Paul runs to the safety of the subway. Guess what? The fare went up at midnight and Paul is short. He pleads for mercy with the cashier, but the latter is adamant. Paul heads out into the night again and finds shelter at the Terminal Bar. He has become Odysseus, and here he meets a waitress, Terry Garr, the first of 3 sirens who prevent him from getting home. Miss Beehive 1965, as the bartender calls her, is an artist too. She does pencil sketches, good ones, of, among others, the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Andy Warhol, and Edie Sedgwick. She listens to the Monkees when she's happy and Joni Mitchell when circumstances demand solemnity. She has free copying privileges at her second job at the print shop. She's also crazy sexy, like Kiki and Marcy, and like the later 2 sirens, the Mr. Softy ice cream vendor, played by Catherine O'Hara, and the second sculptress, played by Verna Bloom. Paul somehow manages to disappoint all these women, just as he disappoints the would-be homosexual pickup he asks vainly for help. Meanwhile, 2 burglars, played by Cheech and Chong, are thieving up a storm. A number of motifs and image systems converge to trap Paul in a seeming lattice of coincidence. Water imagery, burning, mutilation, and castration, German symbols, both Nazi and Cold War, the death's head, or Totenkopf, S&M and fetish clothing, and sex, or the promise of it being a prelude to death. Sketching plus copying plus an ice cream truck plus a bullhorn and rape whistle equal disaster for Paul. Specifically, he is forced to flee for his life from a gay lynch mob. Through a series of, again, seemingly fortuitous circumstances, he is finally delivered from his persecutors and arrives with the rising sun back to the world of order, the world of word processing and Mozart. Scorsese explains in his commentary that this film was something of a personal response to his having abandoned the security of Midtown Manhattan for bohemian Soho. He doesn't like these people, and it shows. After Chong complains that a smart thief would prefer to steal a stereo rather than a sculpture, Cheech declares that stereo is just a stereo, but art is forever. After Hours is as devastating a satire of the New York art scene as Roger Corman's A Bucket of Blood. Dick Miller appears in both. I don't think that's a coincidence either. After Hours doesn't appear high on the list of critics' favorite Scorsese films. Perhaps because it wasn't a hit, perhaps because the critics believe comedy is beneath them and Scorsese. Well, as they say, anyone can be serious, but being funny is hard. What you get with After Hours is all the intensity of a Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, or The Wolf of Wall Street, plus all the laughter that can be wrung from desperation, which is a lot. The cast, especially Rosanna Arquette, is wonderful. Scorsese's deployment of his actors is admirable, and Michael Bauhaus's camera work is thrillingly inventive and makes maximum use of minimal available light. After Hours is available from Warner Brothers in both America and Britain in a good DVD transfer for $6. For just $16, however, you can get it from Amazon.com as part of a 5-DVD box set called the Martin Scorsese Collection, which also includes Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Goodfellas, Mean Streets, and his first film, Who's That Knocking at My Door? Scorsese's other nightmare comedy, The King of Comedy, was released on Blu-ray last year, so I suspect After Hours will follow soon. In week 12 of A Year of Cinema, we examine the struggle of being versus becoming in John Frankenheimer's 1966 horror fable, Seconds.